The new Mental Ray 3.5 architecture and design material is a single material with all the options to recreate almost all the materials you need for your projects without having to chase down and combine different shaders every time. On top of that, the material will always be physically accurate and guarantee realistic results under any lighting setting. In these images you see some examples. All these models use the Archi design material with only a couple of textures changed. Everything else is just parameters tweaking. Let's see how it does that and how easy it is to use. Here we have a simple building using only few materials. All the materials are now basic architectural material, as you would get when importing models from DWG files, for example. There is also an environment object around the scene, visible here as a bounding box. The only purpose for it is to create reflection on the glass surfaces. Let's render as is. The lighting is from the new Mental Ray sun and sky. The image is not too bad, but that's all thanks to the lighting. Let's start improving things, starting from the walls. First thing to do is to convert the current material to the new Archi design. The options for the materials are quite a few, as you see from the rollouts, but there's nothing really complicated. First thing is to select a template. Templates gives you the basic settings for some common materials. Some of the choices in this list can be combined to change only some aspects of the current settings. The three families of materials you can create are finishes, transparent materials, and metals. Let's replace the current walls paint with masonry, and the masonry template gives you a sample diffuse and bump texture for generic bricks. Depending on your model mapping coordinates, you will have to adjust the tiling or size of the map. In this case, since this model was imported from Autodesk Revit, all the mapping coordinates are real world. So using the map navigator, we change each map to use the real world scale, and we set the map size 80 by 80, for example. We do it for the diffuse map and for the bump map, and the bump map will also change the other ones since they are all instances. And let's render now. Looks good, but the default surface is barely reflective. Let's say we want to enhance it a bit, like if it was painted over. All we need to do is to go back to the templates and choose a different kind of surface. These options will change only the surface parameters, leaving the rest of the material untouched. Let's choose glossy finish, for example, and see what happens. As we see, the material is still the same, but there is much more reflection on the wall surfaces now. Maybe too much, so we select the pearl finish, which is somewhere in between. And as any other material, texture can be changed by replacing both diffuse and bump maps with a custom brick texture. We can finalize our wall material. So downloads, custom bricks, and for the bump, downloads, custom bricks bump, and render again. And with this, the walls are done. Let's look at other materials for this building. Next one is the windows frames. Again, we change it to Archi design, and this time we select the satin metal template. We adjust the diffuse color to make it darker, and that will be it. Next one is glass. Change it to Archi design and choose one of the glass templates. There are three choices for simple flat glass panels. The best one is to use the thin geometry one. Thin glass ignores the glass refraction and speeds up rendering, as you can see if we enable the background for the sample material. For glass sculptures or application where refraction is important, then use the solid geometry or physical glass templates, which will give you increasingly realistic results. Let's set it back to thin geometry. The Archi design material lets you accurately control the reflection and refraction characteristics of the surface. The default glass is fully reflective and fully transparent. We can lower transparency a bit and make the tint of the glass a bit stronger. Both reflection and transparency can be blurred using the glossiness settings, and we will look at that in a minute. Let's look at BRDF rollout. First, BRDF stands for bidirectional reflection distribution function. In short, it's the amount of reflection of a surface based on the angle of incidence. By default, glass uses a Fresnel reflection, which has little reflection when looking at it perpendicularly, but a lot more when the angle of incidence starts getting very narrow. The graph shows you how the reflection changes based on the angle. If the default realistic Fresnel is not what you want, you can customize it. For example, by using a low but not zero reflection at 0 degrees, something like 0.1, leaving 1 at 90 degrees and changing the curve to a smoother one, for example 2.5. And let's check how it renders with the settings so far. We can see the glass reflection pretty clear, the partial transparency and the tint, all done quickly and very easily. And as we mentioned earlier, we can also have glossy reflection and refraction. For example, let's change the ground plane material. Again, we convert it to Archi design, and this time we select the polished concrete template. Polished concrete has a default texture, so let's adjust it to use real world scale and set a size of 100 by 100, and let's see how it looks like. You can see some reflection, very realistic for a polished concrete. Let's go up to the material settings and see what happened. We see that the reflection parameters have a value of glossiness that is less than 1. A value of 1 means a pure, clear reflection. A value less than 1 means the reflection is increasingly blurry. When the glossiness value is less than 1, the glossy samples value is enabled, and let us specify the accuracy of the blurry reflection. If we ignore the concrete texture, setting the diffuse level to 0 and then making the color darker, we can better check how the reflection is affected by these parameters. We also increase the reflectivity all the way to 1, and we can point the camera down a bit. Okay, and now let's first give it a try with the glossiness set to 1. As expected, we get a clear mirror-like reflection. Now bringing glossiness down a bit, like 0.6, the blur effect will become visible. The amount of blur is related to the glossiness value. The lower the glossiness, the more the blur effect. This is because the samples are taken with a wider angle. If we lower the glossiness again, 8 samples will not be sufficient. In this image we already see some grain due to the low sampling. So let's do one more test with glossiness of 0.4 and increase the samples to 24. We can see a lot more blur in the reflection, but also much longer rendering time because of the higher number of samples. As a compromise, you can use fast interpolation. With fast interpolation, you can lower the number of samples and smooth the results. In the fast glossy interpolation rollout, you can set the density of the reflection sampling to be half or a quarter and to interpolate with the other close samples. Let's choose 1/3 resolution and let's bring back our glossy samples down like 8 and make a copy and render again. The blur looks nice, no artifacts, and the rendering time decreased considerably. Of course, this is not as accurate as before, but it saves a lot of time. The last feature we want to demonstrate are the two special effects, ambient occlusion and round corners. Ambient occlusion was a shader available also in previous version, but here it has been included in the material to enhance edges and lighting. We switch to another scene to demonstrate it. This interior has objects, walls, and contacts with each other, creating many corners. All the materials have some sort of reflectivity, more or less glossy. Let's render as is first. What we see here is all correct, but the corners gives you the impression that the objects are not really touching each other or the floor, and the wall edges are barely visible. Some extra shadow would be nice under the chair and on all the boxes, interior corners, and also the wall could use some more visible edges, either shadow or just like some dirt effect. By turning on ambient occlusion and setting the distance to just a few inches, we can accomplish that. We do that for the walls material and then for the boxes material. Let's keep the previous rendering and render again. Let's check the images side by side and zoom in a bit. You can see that there is some extra shadow along the edges, making the boxes look like they're really on the floor, not just floating above. Also, the corners inside the boxes and on the wall have a darker color. And now for the other special effects, around corners, we switch to another scene. Round corners is a simple effect that makes sharp corners look round. It doesn't change the geometry itself, it's just a shader effect. It can be used on any object of any size, but it's very useful for small objects and close-ups. If you look at the microscope model, you see it's quite low poly and the edges are just sharp corners between faces. If we render it now, no matter how good our material or lighting is, we will see unrealistic edges, way too clean to look right. Turning on round corners